All right, number 16, let's call this one Fluent and maybe subtitle it Fluid. Understanding those titles might be interchangeable. But before we get into the why of either title, this is a relatively famous story in which God is literally going to open up the ground and swallow a division of the Levites by the name of Korah, along with a number of other individuals in Israel who once again are giving Moses a little bit of grief. But we have seen that this section of chapter seems to mark a turning point in which, after Moses seems to have demonstrated a protracted period of patient endurance, God is intervening on his behalf. After, in chapter 11, having seen Israel get back on the move, they quickly get back to complaining when they're complaining about their condition in general and then complaining about the food. God intervenes on Moses' behalf there. If that wasn't enough, Miriam and Aaron, his brother and sister, are going to complain about his choice of wife, and God is going to intervene very publicly there when he gives Miriam leprosy. And if that wasn't enough, when they get close to the promised land and send the spies in to bring back a report, of course, 10 of them bring back a report. It's too tough, but 2 of them are saying, oh, it's quite possible. Probably because God has promised it. And just like he delivered us out of the hands of the Egyptians, I'm not sure they're any tougher than the Egyptians were. That's my ad lib. But the bottom line was their response was, look, let's get rid of our current leaders, Moses, Aaron, and everybody else who's telling us to go face these giants, and pick some new leaders and go back to Egypt. Once again, God is going to intervene on Moses' behalf, but that's not going to be enough. Why? Because by the time we get to chapter 16 here, that set the stage for probably his greatest demonstration of intervention, as we said, as he opens up the ground and swallows those, giving Moses grief this time. But the thing that probably stood out to me more than anything was the degree to which dishonesty played a role in this conversation between Korah and Moses. Understanding once again, because God described Moses as a faithful servant, the fact that Moses was really just representing God. And so this, in a lot of ways, is a dispute between Korah and God. But because they're directly talking to Moses, let's pick up in verse 3 of chapter 16, where it reads, they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron and said to them, you have gone too far. Pause there. First nuance in their deception is a base allegation. And always be careful of this red flag. When you get an allegation without evidence, that's a bad sign. And that's exactly what they're doing here. But moving on. They're going to say, for all in the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Pause there. That there is what we call an exaggeration, because God had clearly delineated roles, saying that there were only a few people in the congregation who could touch the most holy things unless they just wanted to die. And so not everybody had the same role, and not everybody in the congregation was holy. Why? Because we've already mentioned, by the time you get to Deuteronomy, God through Moses is going to make it very clear. It's not because Israel was righteous that they're getting this opportunity. Moving on, though, it's going to say, skipping down to the end of verse 3, why then do you exalt yourselves? And that is a projection, because this rebellion is Korah trying to bring Moses down in Israel so they can passively bring themselves up. Understand, projection is another nuance on deception in this conversation. But it's not going to stop there, because in verse 13, they're going to say, is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey? Half truth. A land flowing with milk and honey in which you were slaves. Where they're going to continue in verse 14 to say, moreover, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey because you refused to go. Moses tried to encourage you to go, you refused, and that's why you didn't make it in. And so understand, not only does Korah seem to be quite fluid in the way they move between nuanced types of deception, that fluidity seems to represent a fluency with deception. And the reason why that caught my attention this time is because we are living in times in which it seems that more and more fluency in deception is a thing. Think of it this way. I am extremely impressed when I see people speaking in a second language, a language not their own, without an accent, without a hitch, without a problem. But I am deeply concerned when I see people speaking in the language of dishonesty without a hitch, without an accent, without a problem, because that means that's rehearsed, which is a huge problem, because some of God's most severe warnings are for those who become accomplished at deception. But on the flip side, as spin grows more sophisticated, so does the wisdom that God is willing to give us if we diligently seek him, which is why we often say his best to you as you go forward in him.